Rebecca Stone had learned to read surgical reports in Afghanistan, where every incision told a story, and every missing organ raised questions. As an Army combat medic turned night shift nurse at Philadelphia General Hospital, she'd thought those days were behind her. But when she noticed that wealthy patients were receiving organ transplants within days instead of years, and homeless patients were disappearing from the ER without discharge papers, her training kicked in. The patterns she was seeing matched something she'd witnessed in Kabul, patterns that got people killed. Welcome to Open Book Stories. Before we begin this chilling tale of medical corruption, moral courage, and a nurse who couldn't stop being a soldier, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Philadelphia General Hospital's North Wing fell silent after midnight. The daytime chaos, rushing doctors, anxious families, the controlled urgency of a major metropolitan hospital faded into the steady rhythm of machines and the soft footsteps of night shift staff. Rebecca Stone preferred it this way. The quiet, the solitude, the predictable routine that helped keep the memories at bay. She was 38 years old, though the lines around her eyes suggested someone who'd lived longer. 8 years in Army Medical Corps, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, countless surgeries performed under fire, and expertise in trauma care that few civilian nurses could match. But Rebecca wasn't a trauma nurse anymore. She worked the overnight shift in post-operative care, monitoring patients recovering from scheduled surgeries. It was mundane, safe, exactly what her therapist at the VA had recommended. You need structure without chaos, Dr. Martinez had told her during their sessions. Routine without crisis. Your body is still in combat mode, Rebecca. We need to teach it that the war is over. Except the war never really ended. Not in her head. The hypervigilance, the way she counted exits in every room, the split-second assessment of everyone who entered her field of vision. These weren't symptoms she could turn off, but they were manageable. And the night shift helped. Fewer people, less stimulation, more control over her environment. Rebecca had been working at Philadelphia General for 8 months. She lived alone in a small apartment in Fishtown, walked to work to avoid the crowded subway, and kept her interactions with colleagues polite but minimal. Her routine was precise. Arrive at 10:45 p.m., change into scrubs, review patient charts for the incoming shift. At 11 p.m., she'd receive handoff from the evening nurse, Paula Jenkins, a veteran nurse who'd been at Philadelphia General for 20 years. Quiet night, Paula would usually say. Post-ops are stable, pain managed, no complications. Then Rebecca would begin her rounds. Check vitals, adjust IV drips, monitor for post-surgical complications, document everything with the meticulous attention to detail she'd learned in the Army. By 3 a.m., most patients would be sleeping. Rebecca would sit at the nurse's station, updating charts, responding to call buttons, maintaining the peaceful atmosphere that helped people heal. It was during these quiet hours that Rebecca had begun noticing things that didn't quite add up. It started with a patient named Robert Chen, a 55-year-old businessman recovering from a liver transplant. According to his chart, he'd been on the transplant waiting list for only 6 days before receiving a matching organ. 6 days. Rebecca had worked in military hospitals long enough to know that the average wait time for a liver transplant in the United States was months, sometimes years. Even with his wealth and connections, 6 days was statistically improbable. She'd mentioned it casually to Paula during shift change. Lucky guy, right? Paula had replied with a shrug. Sometimes things line up perfectly. Rebecca had let it go. Maybe Paula was right. Maybe it was just good fortune. But then it happened again. Margaret Harrison, 62, kidney transplant. Wait time, 9 days, and again. David Cole, 48, heart transplant. Wait time, 11 days, all wealthy patients. All receiving organs within weeks of being listed. All treated by the same surgical team, led by Dr. Marcus Brennan, the hospital's most prestigious transplant surgeon. Rebecca's military training had taught her to recognize patterns. In Afghanistan, patterns meant enemy activity, IEDs, ambush sites. You learned to see what didn't belong, what broke the normal rhythm of daily life. These transplants broke the pattern. She began documenting, not officially, just notes in a personal journal she kept in her locker. Patient names, surgery dates, wait times, surgical teams, basic intelligence gathering, the kind she'd done during medical evacuations when something felt wrong about casualty reports. The more she documented, the clearer the pattern became. Dr. Brennan's team performed an average of 3 transplants per week, all during night shifts, all with remarkably short wait times. And then there was the other pattern, the one that made Rebecca's stomach turn. Homeless patients coming through the ER, admitted for minor issues, dehydration, infections, injuries, and then disappearing from the system. No discharge papers, no transfer records, just gone. Rebecca had noticed the first one 3 weeks ago. Michael Torres, a homeless veteran with pneumonia. She'd started his IV in the ER, gotten him stabilized, and gone on her break. When she returned, Bay 7 was empty. No patient, no chart, no record he'd ever been there. Where's the patient from Bay 7? She'd asked the ER attending. What patient? Dr. Stevens had looked genuinely confused. Middle-aged veteran, pneumonia. I started his IV 20 minutes ago. Dr. Stevens had checked the computer. No record of anyone in Bay 7 tonight. You sure you got the Bay number right? Rebecca had been certain. But without documentation, without proof, what could she say? It had happened twice more since then. Homeless patients admitted to the ER during her shift, and then vanishing without a trace. Rebecca told herself she was being paranoid. PTSD-induced hypervigilance, seeing patterns that weren't really there. But then she remembered something from Afghanistan that made all the patterns snap into focus. Afghanistan, 2016. Forward Operating Base, Salerno. Rebecca had been working in the surgical unit when they'd brought in a local Afghan man, unconscious, with massive internal bleeding. The medical team had worked for 3 hours to save him, but he'd died on the table. During the autopsy, standard procedure for unexplained deaths, they'd discovered something horrifying. The man was missing a kidney, surgically removed, probably weeks before his death. The extraction had been professional, clean, done by someone with medical training. But there was no scar on the outside. The incision had healed completely, leaving no visible trace. Further investigation revealed a black market organ trafficking network operating in Kabul. Wealthy patients from the Middle East and Europe would pay enormous sums for organs. Poor Afghans, refugees, homeless, people with no family to advocate for them, would be targeted. Sometimes they'd be paid small amounts and told the donation was safe. Other times they'd be taken by force, operated on without consent, and discarded when they were no longer useful. The network had included hospital staff, military contractors, and local officials. It had taken months to dismantle, And even then, the ringleaders had escaped prosecution through bribery and political connections. Rebecca had been part of the team that documented the evidence. She'd seen the surgical reports, the financial records, the testimony from victims who'd survived. She'd learned to recognize the signs of organ trafficking, the patterns, the methods, the way vulnerable people could disappear from medical systems without anyone noticing or caring. Now, sitting in Philadelphia General Hospital at 2:15 a.m., reviewing charts and patient records, Rebecca was seeing those same patterns: wealthy patients getting impossible transplants, vulnerable patients disappearing, surgical teams operating in the middle of the night when oversight was minimal. She wanted to be wrong, desperately wanted her PTSD to be playing tricks, creating threats that didn't exist, but the evidence kept accumulating. Rebecca decided to conduct a systematic investigation, not confrontational, not accusatory, just careful observation and documentation. She started by cross-referencing surgical schedules with patient admissions. Dr. Brennan's transplant surgeries almost always occurred between midnight and 5 a.m. The stated reason was optimal organ viability, but that didn't explain why other hospitals didn't follow the same schedule. She tracked the anonymous donors whose organs were being transplanted. In every case, the donor had died during a routine procedure at Philadelphia General. Traffic accidents, drug overdoses, sudden cardiac events, all plausible causes of death that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. But when Rebecca requested access to the donor medical records, something nurses rarely did but had the technical authority to review, she found they were heavily redacted or missing entirely. System glitch, the records clerk had explained. It is working on it. Except the glitch had persisted for months and only affected donor records. The breakthrough came during a routine check on Robert Chen, the liver transplant patient she'd noticed weeks earlier. Rebecca was reviewing his recovery progress when she noticed something in his pre-operative blood work. His tissue typing showed markers that didn't quite match the donor organ he'd received. Not enough to cause rejection, the markers were close, but enough to suggest the match wasn't as perfect as the surgical notes claimed. Rebecca pulled up the records for the other rapid transplants. Margaret Harrison's kidney showed similar discrepancies. So did David Cole's heart. These weren't optimal matches found through the National Registry. These were adequate matches being presented as perfect ones, which meant someone was either manipulating the matching process or harvesting organs from unauthorized sources. That night, Rebecca stayed late, using her hospital credentials to access deeper levels of the medical record system. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions: a shadow patient database. Individuals admitted to the ER, assigned temporary medical record numbers, but never entered into the main hospital system. No names, just ID codes. All admitted during night shifts, all assigned to special surgical teams, and all matching the description of the homeless patients Rebecca had seen disappear. She photographed everything with her personal phone, hands shaking as she documented the evidence. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't PTSD. This was real. Philadelphia General Hospital, one of the most respected medical institutions in the country, was running an organ trafficking operation. Rebecca knew she needed to report what she'd found. But to whom? If the operation involved Dr. Brennan, one of the hospital's most powerful surgeons, and required systems-level cooperation to maintain the shadow database, then hospital administration might be compromised. She decided to approach someone she thought she could trust: Dr. Sarah Kim, a young resident who worked in the ER and had always seemed ethical, compassionate, genuinely committed to helping patients regardless of their ability to pay. Rebecca found her during a break in the doctor's lounge. "Dr. Kim, can I speak with you privately?" Sarah looked up from her coffee, surprised. Rebecca rarely initiated conversation with anyone. "Of course. Is everything okay?" They stepped into an empty consultation room. Rebecca closed the door. "I need to show you something, but I need you to promise you'll keep an open mind." Sarah's expression grew concerned. "Rebecca, what's going on?" Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Sarah the photographs of the shadow database, the surgical records, the pattern of disappearing patients. "I think the hospital is trafficking organs, taking them from homeless patients and transplanting them into wealthy ones. I have 8 months of documentation." Sarah stared at the photos, her face pale. For a long moment, she didn't speak. "Rebecca," she finally said, her voice careful, "have you talked to anyone at the VA about this?" The question hit Rebecca like a punch. "This isn't PTSD, Sarah. Look at the evidence." "I am looking at it. And what I see is suggestive, but not conclusive. These could be administrative errors, documentation issues, 8 months of consistent patterns, patients disappearing without discharge papers. Homeless populations are transient. They leave hospitals AMA all the time. And transplant matching can seem miraculous when everything aligns correctly." Rebecca felt the walls closing in. Sarah didn't believe her. Or worse, Sarah was part of the system that kept the truth hidden. "I saw this in Afghanistan," Rebecca said quietly. "I know what organ trafficking looks like." Sarah's expression softened with something that looked like pity. "I know you've been through trauma, and I know military medical service can leave scars that aren't always visible. But Philadelphia General is a reputable institution. The accusations you're making, they're serious. And without stronger evidence, what would constitute stronger evidence?" Sarah hesitated. "Direct observation of illegal activity, multiple corroborating witnesses, physical proof beyond administrative anomalies." Rebecca nodded slowly. She understood what Sarah was really saying. "You're a traumatized veteran seeing patterns that aren't there, and no one will take you seriously without irrefutable proof." Fine. She'd get irrefutable proof. Rebecca spent the next 2 weeks planning her operation. With the same attention to detail she'd applied to medical evacuations in Afghanistan. She identified the key location: Operating Room 7, the surgical suite where Dr. Brennan's team performed most of their transplants. It was located in the older wing of the hospital, away from main traffic patterns, with limited camera coverage. She mapped the schedules. Dr. Brennan's team worked Tuesday and Thursday nights, always starting around 1 a.m. Security guards made rounds every hour, but there were 12-minute gaps in coverage due to the size of the facility. Most importantly, Rebecca discovered that OR 7 had an observation gallery, a small room above the operating theater with one-way glass. Originally built for medical students to watch procedures, it hadn't been used in years, was kept locked. But Rebecca had befriended enough maintenance staff to acquire a key. On Thursday, November 14th at 12:45 a.m., Rebecca entered the observation gallery. She positioned herself where she had a clear view of the operating theater below and waited. At 1:15 a.m., Dr. Brennan's team entered. 5 people. Brennan himself, 2 surgical nurses Rebecca didn't recognize, an anesthesiologist named Dr. Foster, and a hospital administrator named Patricia Hughes. They wheeled in 2 gurneys. On one was Robert Caldwell, a wealthy hedge fund manager scheduled for a kidney transplant. Rebecca had seen his name on the surgery board. On the other gurney was a patient Rebecca recognized, a homeless man who'd been admitted to the ER 2 days ago with an infected wound. No name in the system, just patient ID. Chudran 7743. Rebecca began recording with her phone. Dr. Brennan worked methodically. The homeless patient was anesthetized, prepped, and within 20 minutes, Brennan was harvesting his kidney. The organ was healthy, viable, perfectly suited for transplant. The homeless man would survive the procedure. One kidney was sufficient for normal function, but he'd never consented to the surgery. He probably didn't even know it was happening. Rebecca captured everything on video. The non-consensual organ harvesting, the immediate transplant into the wealthy patient, the casual conversation between team members that made it clear this wasn't their first such operation. "This is the third one this month," Patricia Hughes was saying. "We're exceeding projections. Dr. Brennan, your efficiency is remarkable." "It's not about efficiency," Brennan replied, his voice muffled by the surgical mask. "It's about optimal outcomes. These patients get the care they need, and we eliminate the inefficiency of the National Registry system." "What about the donors?" one of the nurses asked. "They're provided with post-operative care, given antibiotics, and discharged when stable. Most don't even remember the procedure. And frankly, a kidney is a small price for the medical care they receive." Rebecca's hands shook as she recorded. These people genuinely believed they were doing something noble, providing health care to the homeless while saving the lives of wealthy patients. They'd rationalize the complete violation of medical ethics into something they could live with. She was about to leave when Dr. Foster, the anesthesiologist, looked up toward the observation gallery. For a moment, their eyes met through the one-way glass. Rebecca froze. The glass was supposed to be one way, but Foster's expression changed. Recognition, alarm. "We have a problem," Foster said quietly. Dr. Brennan looked up. "What kind of problem?" "Someone's in the gallery." Rebecca didn't wait to hear more. She grabbed her phone and ran. Behind her, she could hear shouting, footsteps thundering up the stairs toward the observation gallery. She sprinted through the hospital corridors, her military training taking over. Assess, adapt, evade. The hospital was a maze, but Rebecca had spent 8 months memorizing every floor, every exit, every route. She took the service stairs down to the basement level, emerged near the loading docks, and kept moving. Behind her, she could hear more footsteps, voices shouting into radios. Hospital security was being mobilized. Rebecca burst through an emergency exit, triggering an alarm that echoed through the night. She ran across the parking lot toward her car, fumbling for her keys. A security vehicle pulled in front of her, blocking her path. 2 guards got out. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of them said. Rebecca didn't stop. She veered left, running between parked cars, using the vehicles as cover. Her combat medic training included basic evasion tactics. She wasn't going to be caught this easily. She made it to Spruce Street, flagged down a taxi that had just dropped off a patient, and jumped in before the driver could protest. "Drive," she said, shoving money at him. "Please, emergency." The driver, sensing genuine distress, pulled away from the curb. Rebecca looked back. Security guards were running toward the street, but they were too late. She was safe. For now, but she had the evidence. Video proof of non-consensual organ harvesting. Names, faces, procedures documented in graphic detail. Now she just needed to figure out who to trust with it. Rebecca went to ground. She checked into a cheap motel in South Philadelphia, paying cash, using a fake name. The video evidence was backed up to 3 different cloud storage accounts, and she'd sent encrypted copies to 2 trusted fellow veterans from her Afghanistan deployment. She spent the next day researching her options. The Philadelphia Police Department? But they'd worked closely with the hospital. The FBI? But making a report would take time, and by then, the evidence might be destroyed. She needed someone with authority, resources, and the ability to act quickly. That's when she thought of Agent Michael Torres from the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division. They'd worked together briefly in Afghanistan. Torres had been investigating contractor fraud on military bases. He'd given her his card years ago, told her to call if she ever needed help. Rebecca called the number from a burner phone she'd picked up at a convenience store. Torres. Agent Torres. This is Rebecca Stone. We met in Afghanistan in 2016. I need help. There was a pause. Rebecca Stone, Army medic, right? I remember. What kind of help? She explained quickly. The organ trafficking operation, the video evidence, her escape from the hospital. Torres listened without interrupting. Where are you now? He asked when she finished. Rebecca gave him the motel address. Torres said he'd be there in 90 minutes with a team. While she waited, Rebecca reviewed the video again, making sure she had everything she needed. The footage was clear, damning. Dr. Brennan's face was visible, his voice audible, his actions unmistakable. This would bring down the entire operation. At 3:00 p.m., there was a knock on her door. Rebecca checked through the peephole. A man in an FBI windbreaker, credentials held up for her to see. She opened the door. Agent Torres stepped inside, followed by 2 other agents. He was older than Rebecca remembered, graying at the temples, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. Rebecca, good to see you again, though I wish it was under better circumstances. Thank you for coming so quickly. Let's see what you have. Rebecca showed him the video on her laptop. Torres watched intently, his expression darkening as the footage played. When it finished, he looked at Rebecca. This is explosive. If it's authentic, it's authentic. I recorded it myself 2 nights ago. Torres nodded slowly. Rebecca, I need to ask you something directly. Have you been experiencing any psychological issues since leaving the military? PTSD, paranoia, difficulty distinguishing reality? Rebecca's blood went cold. What? I'm not questioning your integrity. I'm asking because when we pursue a case like this, the defense will absolutely go after your credibility. If there's anything in your medical history, my PTSD doesn't affect my ability to recognize illegal activity. I believe you, but I need to prepare for what the defense will argue. Rebecca showed him the documentation she'd compiled, the shadow database, the patient records, the statistical anomalies. Torres reviewed it all carefully. This is strong evidence, he said finally. I'm going to need to take this to my superiors, get authorization for a full investigation. How long will that take? Could be days, could be weeks. Healthcare fraud cases are complex. By then, they'll destroy the evidence. Torres stood up. Rebecca, you've done the right thing by bringing this to us. Now you need to let us handle it through proper channels. Go home, stay safe, don't try to investigate further. We'll be in touch. He left with copies of all her evidence. Rebecca sat in the motel room feeling uneasy. Something about the interaction had felt wrong. Torres had been too calm, too procedural. He hadn't seemed shocked or urgent enough given what she'd shown him. 2 hours later, she found out why. Her phone rang, her real phone, the one she'd turned off and hidden. Someone had reactivated it remotely. The caller ID showed Philadelphia General Hospital. Rebecca answered cautiously. Hello? Nurse Stone. It was Dr. Brennan's voice. I think we need to talk. How did you get this number? Rebecca demanded. We've been trying to reach you since you left the hospital so abruptly, Dr. Brennan replied, his tone calm, almost paternal. You've created quite a situation, Rebecca. Agent Torres contacted me an hour ago. He's very concerned about you. Rebecca's mind raced. Torres had gone to Brennan? That made no sense unless... Torres is part of it, she said flatly. Agent Torres understands that Philadelphia General provides essential services to both wealthy patients and vulnerable populations. Sometimes those services intersect in ways that aren't immediately obvious to outsiders. You're paying him off. I prefer to think we're all working toward the same goal, saving lives. Torres ensures our operation doesn't face unnecessary legal complications. We ensure the FBI's healthcare fraud division has excellent closure rates through our cooperation on other cases. Rebecca felt sick. The corruption ran deeper than she'd imagined. The homeless patients you're harvesting organs from, they didn't consent. They receive excellent medical care in exchange. Most of them would die on the streets without intervention. We save their lives and use their organs to save others. It's a net positive. It's illegal. It's unethical. It's necessary, Brennan interrupted. The organ donation system is broken, Rebecca. You know this. You've seen patients die waiting for transplants. We've found a solution that works. By victimizing the most vulnerable people in society. By offering them health care they wouldn't otherwise receive. Many of our donors thank us afterward when they understand what we've done. How many of them actually understand? How many remember? Silence on the line. Rebecca, Brennan continued, his voice harder now. You're a veteran. You understand difficult choices in impossible situations. You've had to make them yourself. The video you recorded, Torres has it now. It's evidence in a closed FBI investigation that found no wrongdoing. Without that evidence, you have nothing. I have backup copies, which no one will believe without corroboration. And I think you'll find that your mental health history will raise questions about your reliability. PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoid ideation. I'm not paranoid if they're really out to get me. Brennan actually laughed. Fair point. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept that you can't fight this. Torres will close his investigation with a finding that you were experiencing a PTSD-related episode. The hospital will offer you a generous severance package and strong references. You'll move on with your life. And if I don't accept that, then you'll find yourself unemployable in the medical field, possibly committed for psychiatric evaluation, and facing legal action for industrial espionage and defamation. Your choice? The line went dead. Rebecca sat in the motel room, understanding how completely outmaneuvered she'd been. Brennan had Torres, probably had hospital administration, maybe had others throughout the system. But Rebecca had been outmaneuvered before. In Afghanistan, in situations where she'd been outgunned and surrounded, she hadn't given up then. She wasn't giving up now. Rebecca spent the next 48 hours planning her counterstrike. If Torres was compromised and the FBI wouldn't help, she needed to go public. But not just public. She needed to go viral in a way that couldn't be suppressed. She contacted her old military network. Within hours, she had connections to investigative journalists, veterans advocacy groups, and medical ethics organizations. More importantly, she found someone who could help. David Kim, a cybersecurity specialist she'd served with in Afghanistan. He'd left the army and now worked in digital security. "I need you to do something that might be illegal," Rebecca told him over an encrypted chat. "Tell me what you need," Rebecca explained. Kim listened, then said, "I can do that, but you need to be ready for the consequences." "I'm ready." On Monday morning, November 25th, Rebecca's story went live simultaneously across multiple platforms. The video of Dr. Brennan's operation, fully authenticated and time-stamped, appeared on YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, and was sent directly to every major news organization in Philadelphia. But that wasn't all. Kim had hacked into Philadelphia General's servers and retrieved the complete shadow database, every victim, every surgery, every financial transaction. It all went public at once. By noon, the story was national news. By evening, federal investigators who weren't compromised were at the hospital with warrants. Dr. Brennan was arrested at his home that night. Agent Torres was suspended pending investigation. Patricia Hughes and the surgical team were taken into custody. And Rebecca? She did a single interview with a national news network, explaining what she'd witnessed and why she'd come forward. "I took an oath as a medic," she told the interviewer, "to do no harm, to protect life. That oath didn't end when I left the army. Sometimes protecting people means standing up to powerful institutions, even when it costs you everything." The interviewer asked if she regretted her actions. "No," Rebecca said. "I regret that I didn't act sooner." 6 months later, Rebecca stood in front of a Senate committee investigating organ transplant system failures. She'd testified about what she'd witnessed at Philadelphia General and the systemic issues that had allowed such an operation to exist. The hospital had been shut down pending a complete investigation. Dozens of victims had been identified and were receiving counseling and medical care. Dr. Brennan was awaiting trial on federal charges. Agent Torres had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony about other cases of medical corruption he'd helped cover up. Rebecca had lost her nursing license during the investigation, temporarily, pending review, but veterans organizations and medical ethics groups had rallied to her support. She'd also become something she never wanted to be, a public figure. Speaking engagements, interview requests, advocacy work. It was exhausting and often triggering for her PTSD, but it was also purposeful, meaningful. One afternoon, she received a letter from a man she didn't know. His name was Michael Torres, not the FBI agent, but the homeless veteran she'd seen in the ER 8 months ago. The one who disappeared. "Dear Nurse Stone," the letter began. "I don't remember much about my time at Philadelphia General Hospital, but I recently learned that you're the reason they couldn't keep doing what they did to people like me. I wanted to thank you and to tell you that I'm getting help now. Real help. The kind that doesn't require me to lose a piece of myself in exchange. Thank you for being the person who wouldn't look away." Rebecca kept that letter on her refrigerator, where she saw it every morning. A reminder of why she'd fought, why she'd risked everything. She was still that combat medic from Afghanistan, still the person who couldn't ignore suffering, who couldn't pretend not to see evil just because acknowledging it was inconvenient. Some missions never end. They just take different forms. And some oaths, like the one Rebecca had taken to protect life, don't have expiration dates. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone who couldn't look away from injustice? Someone whose moral code was stronger than their instinct for self-preservation? A healer who understood that sometimes protecting people means fighting the very system you work within? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the whistleblowers, the truth tellers, the ones who stood up when everyone else stayed silent. If this story moved you, subscribe to Open Book Stories. We publish powerful narratives about those who choose courage over comfort, truth over safety, and purpose over peace. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous people to corruption are those who've taken an oath to serve and actually meant it.